It's that if we can't talk about the systemic racism in this country without white people going, but also white people have it hard, we can't actually fucking talk about racism in this country.
The Supreme Court is, as many of you know, it used to be a heap of garbage of old white men, and now it's a heap of garbage of old and young white and black people who get together to find new ways to serve the ruling elite and destroy our lives and destroy any form of progress that goes on in this nation. And of course, it's completely undemocratic, and they can sit there forever and fuck up people's lives forever, and they do. And they do. Yeah. So there's been a bunch of decisions that have come down. One of them was on affirmative action, basically saying affirmative action is now illegal, I guess.
So basically, the ruling, the ruling strikes down affirmative action at public and private universities, in this case, specifically UNC and Harvard, UNC being public, Harvard being private. And I want to start by sharing a quote that is so fucking dumb that it actually, like, I actually had a gag reflex when I read it. We'll see if that happens now when I read it out loud.
Are you going to say who it's from?
Yes, I'm going to say
okay.
Chief Justice John Roberts wrote for the majority and wrote, quote, "The student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race. Many universities have for too long done just the opposite, and in doing so, they have concluded wrongly that the touchstones of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin," end quote. What in the actual fuck are you talking about? Because if you little fucking penis wrinkle, if you were not white, do you honestly think that you would be sitting in the place that you're sitting in, being as annoying and stupid as you are? The idea that the experiences of an individual have nothing to do with race? What the fuck? Wow. Okay, so that's his understanding of what race means, which obviously brought him to the conclusion that affirmative action is unnecessary because it has nothing to do with your individual experiences in life. I would like to share some of what Justice Jackson wrote, because she wrote, I recommend that folks read her dissenting opinion because it's a very powerful essay. I don't know what we call it, but opinion, I guess. And I just want to share some of what she wrote. She also recused herself from this vote, by the way, because she went to Harvard and she served 6 years on their board. It wouldn't have mattered, though, because the vote was like 6-2. So even if she had voted, it wouldn't have mattered. She writes, "Our country has never been colorblind. Given the lengthy history of state-sponsored race-based preferences in America, to say that anyone is now victimized if a college considers whether that legacy of discrimination has unequally advantaged its applicants fails to acknowledge the well-documented intergenerational transmission of inequality that still plagues our citizenry." And she goes on to share, basically from the advent of Black folks, Africans on this land, from slavery till today. She goes through not an exhaustive history because that would be impossible. That would be 1 billion pages long. But she goes through some snippets of history that compound, right? This is cumulative. And for instance, she writes that the Supreme Court has been a part of ensuring that Black people stay down. For instance, she writes, in 1883, our predecessors, which on the court, the Supreme Court, invalidated Congress's attempt to enforce the Reconstruction Amendments via the Civil Rights Act of 1875, lecturing that, quote, "there must be some stage when Black Americans take the rank of a mere citizen and cease to be the special favorite of the laws," end quote. Imagine calling Black people in 1875 the favorite of laws. Wow.
Well, but that's exciting because that means we are now back to the young, youthful country we were before 1875. So there is a positive to this, that we have not aged. We're spry. We're young.
We're going back to the good old days.
And if we keep working towards it, we could get back to Stone Age levels.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I bet the U.S. was a better place in Stone Age. So I just want to share some more from what she wrote in her dissenting opinion, and she shares about again, Jim Crow, sharecropping, and how these effects are cumulative. And she writes, in so excluding Black people, these government policies that she writes about, affirmatively operated, one could say affirmatively acted, to dole out preferences to those who, if nothing else, were not Black. Those past preferences carried forward and are reinforced today by the benefits that flow to homeowners and to the holders of other forms of capital that are hard to obtain unless one already has assets. So the redlining, the fact that sharecropping became a thing after slavery, the Great Migrations, Jim Crow, all of these barriers that were put in place so that Blacks could not own property, so that Blacks could not own land, so that they had to still be beholden to white landowners in order to earn a living. All of these things, and today, just like the numbers, the fact that Black wealth is at a microscopic level compared to that of white wealth, this all plays a role in even one's ability to apply to fucking college, much less get in. So she's saying that the affirmative action of the United States government throughout history has been to affirmatively act in ensuring that Black people do not have access to really any education, because it was also illegal to teach slaves how to read, but certainly any higher education. And that remains the case today.
So I don't know. Some of you probably have thought a lot about affirmative action. And some of you probably, it's been something that kind of was not really on your docket a lot, to use the Supreme Court terminology. But affirmative action was a tiny effort, when you really look at the scope of things, to deal with the incredibly racist system in which we live. It was not a solution. It didn't get rid of our systemic racism. It didn't get rid of the racism in the markets, of the racism in housing, of the racism in our policing, of the racism in our prisons, of the racism in our schooling, of the racism in so much across this country. It didn't erase that. It was a tiny Band-Aid on a gushing wound. I think the analogy I used earlier on Twitter was, it was like throwing a rock at a tsunami of white privilege that is this country and has been for many years. And some areas have gotten better and some have not at all, a little better. And so it was throwing a rock at the tsunami, and now the Supreme Court is like, well, the rock is illegal. Throwing that rock is illegal because it could impact the tsunami. It could cause some sort of slight ripple in the tsunami of white privilege, the way our country is set up. The truth is, we have a system where we already have broad, massive affirmative action for white people. For white people. And yes, there's also a mass affirmative action by class, outside of race. Yes, the upper class has tons of privilege outside of race. But also within that, there is just crazy. And of course, the example I like to use, which I've used several times, because it is just so, it's just so clear cut, is they did a large study where they had people apply for jobs. They sent in the exact same, like thousands of the exact same application to various jobs. So the application was identical. The only difference, it didn't say the race on the application. It didn't say what the race was. The only difference was the name. And they sent it to thousands of jobs. And they found out that you are 50% less likely to get the first interview, not to get the job, to get the first interview if you have a Black sounding name. 50% less likely across all types of industries, across all types of jobs, with the exact same application, 50% less likely. And again, this doesn't have to do with your class. You can be poor, you can be wealthy. It's just a black sounding name, 50% less likely. That's systemic racism. And so it doesn't mean, saying that we have systemic racism does not mean that every problem in America comes down to race. It doesn't mean that poor people don't have it tougher in America. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that white people don't generally have the most of these various problems that we could discuss about because they're white. Mm-hmm. They have them for other reasons. Poor people have tons of issues in this country that are they are exploited and abused in so many ways and persecuted, but it's not because they're black. And things are, and if you're poor and black or poor and non-white, then it's worse for you often.
And can we just point out that, like, in talking about affirmative action or talking about how black folks are disadvantaged in our system, if your gut reaction is to say, but white people, that's an issue. And I'm not saying that because it's like, well, we should always just talk about black folks. I'd made a whole fucking movie about poor white folks and their legacy of radical action. So it has nothing to do with that. It's that if we can't talk about the systemic racism in this country without white people going, but also white people have it hard, we can't actually fucking talk about racism in this country. Yeah. We have to be able to sit in that discomfort and be comfortable in being uncomfortable. I get it. It's fucking uncomfortable to talk about race as a white person, knowing that we are privy to this white privilege. And again, white privilege does not mean that your life has been fucking easy. It means it has not been hard because of the color of your skin. That's all white privilege means. It does not mean that you got a fucking silver spoon or a golden spoon or whatever the fuck else kind of spoon. Maybe you didn't even get a spoon, okay? But you did not get a spoon because you're white.
You know, some of you have been making this point in the chat, which I wanted to make as well, which is the university system was set up in some manner to, yes, there are some people that get some good education, but it was set up in some manner in order to actually kind of wall off the managerial class from others getting up into that area. So if you create universities that only a select few, and it started out as very few, right? It was only male. It was largely only male from wealthy families. Now it's broadened, but it started as a way to get them educated in a certain way that would then allow them to be the managerial class, and they would get some of that education, but they'd also just have that degree, which was a piece of paper saying, hey, look, I'm part of the club. Now, then access to those universities grew and grew until you had even poor people taking out loans to go to university. And so more and more jobs started requiring that you had a degree just to even be able to apply. And so really, it seems that the ruling elite are realizing that university has not recently been serving enough to entrench the class system and to stop people from a lower class from rising up too easily. And so they're working in a variety of ways. One is making it overly expensive. Another is getting rid of affirmative action, which, like we've said, was just a Band-Aid on our racist system. They're working to kind of try and put those things back to how they were so that you don't have people rising up from a lower class into a higher class.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so much that I could share, but I don't want to just like read her dissenting opinion because it's not really story time. But I will share this point that definitely goes against what Roberts was saying because he's a fucking idiot. She writes, quote, deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. And having so detached itself from this country's actual past and present experiences, the court has now been lured into interfering with the crucial work that UNC and other institutions of higher learning are trying to do to solve America's real world problems. Now, you can argue whether that's true or not, but no one benefits from ignorance. Although formal race-linked legal barriers are gone, race still matters to the lived experiences of all Americans in innumerable ways. And today's ruling makes things worse, not better. Ultimately, ignoring race just makes it matter more. And I think that is a very powerful point as well, because You know, a lot of people will try to make the point, well, why just wait, you just shouldn't pay attention to race and we shouldn't see race. And it's like, yeah, that sounds really nice and hippy dippy and whatever the fuck and sprout salady, but in the world that we live in, it's not helpful because we live in a racist system. So to say that you don't see it just means that you're not paying attention to the fact that it's fucking racist. It's kind of like saying, oh, well, I just think that men and women are the same and we shouldn't pay it. And it's like, but we're not in society. So to pretend that patriarchy doesn't exist doesn't do us women any fucking favors. It just means that you're not going to pay attention to the fact that we are still second-class citizens compared to men. So it's like, we have to pay attention to this and then act accordingly so that perhaps somewhere down the road after the end of the American Empire, we could potentially get to the point where race does not matter, where we don't have to pay attention to it, where we don't have to pay attention to gender. Wouldn't that be fucking wonderful? But that's not the reality that we live in, and pretending that it is only hurts people in the here and now.
And here's a little positive to take away from this, and some of the other awful Supreme Court decisions. We're going to get to one or two of them here in a moment, but here's a little positive to think about: is affirmative action was not fixing our racist system. Our system continued to be incredibly racist and incredibly fucked up, and so yes, getting rid of it is worse, but only by a little degree.